So, good evening, greetings, assalamu alaikum, hello, namaste, from whatever part of the world I'm speaking to my audience. I warmly welcome all of you to today's session. It's an honor to introduce our guest speaker, Dr. Camila Alva, an environmental and development economist having an inspiring career and a wonderful academic record. Dr. Camila is Harvard MPA and has worked with prestigious institutions like IFPRI, the World Bank, and GRADE, and has led leadership roles in Peruvian government. She has also served in the capacity of Impact Associate at EXA Investment Managers Group, where she focused on impact analysis, ESG factors, and private equity impact investing. Her academic background is equally impressive. She holds degree from Harvard Kennedy School, Science Po, and Catholic University of Peru. So we are very fortunate to have Dr. Camila with us today. She will share her experiences, insights into behavioral economics and environmental policies, and advice for students, academicians, researchers, and our community on how to pursue careers, research in these fields, what are the hot debates, the hot topic, and also she will shed some light on her inspiring career. She is indeed an inspiration to all of us for her lifetime dedication to education, research, and policy making so far. And I'm delighted to have her here today to share her journey, her wisdom, and her stories with us. I'm also joined today by my co-host, Dr. Ghulam Ghouse, who is the founder of NextGen, and he is associated with BNU and University of Lahore, and he's an award-winning researcher. He is one of a beacon for us, particularly in the field of econometrics. So, Dr. Gauss, thank you so much for being here with us today. Dr. Gauss, are you here with us? Okay, so it might be the case that Dr. Gauss will be joining us very shortly. Welcome, Dr. Camila.
Hello, Dr. Aribah. Hello, everyone. It's a pleasure to be here and happy to answer any questions. And well, feel free to contact me later if you need some further details. So yeah, uh, let's go.
Thank you, Dr. Camila. So I'll go with the first question. While I was connecting with you, I had a chance to read, something about you. I searched for you over the LinkedIn, over the Google, and I found out that you had an amazing career so far. So can you please tell us what inspired you to enter in the field of environmental development and behavioral economics?
Um, so my inspiration comes from basically, I come from a developing country with high rates of inequality. My parents had to work very hard to pay for private and good quality education, which is mostly the case, like to access to a good quality education you need to pay private services in education and health. So I had the great opportunity to have parents, supportive parents that, you know, gave me access to those opportunities. But I see a lot of people didn't have the same opportunities as me. So I've been working throughout all my career to try to close those social gaps basically and improve access um, to the same opportunities because there's a lot of people with talent that doesn't have the same opportunities. And so basically that was my motivation to become a development economist. And on the environmental side, I mean, I've worked 3 years as Director of Pollution Control and Chemical Substances in the Ministry of Environment. And that increased my preoccupation about the future of our planet. What are we doing with them, and how dependent are humans from it in a context of like full of uncertainties with regards to the magnitudes of the impact of climate change. So yeah, those are my main kind of motivations.
You just discussed that you have worked in both the public sector and you have worked with international organizations, including World Bank. So, how did these experience shape your perspective on policy making and particularly impact measurement?
Um, I mean, in public administration, I think you have to take very quick decisions, implement regulations and policies on big scale. Sometimes there's not too much time to conduct pilot programs because there can be emergencies, COVID, one of them, for instance.
Hmm.
And this urges us to take last minute decisions. So you have to design and implement policies based on available information, which can be found from previous research, from other experiences, or in the hands of local stakeholders and experts. So in this situation, the best you can do is to make sure you have a mechanisms to properly identify and consult key stakeholders and learn as much as you can from past experiences. And it's very important also to establish mechanisms to receive constant feedback through monitoring and evaluation to learn from mistakes and optimize your policies. Monitoring and evaluation is a key component of impact measurement and management. Ultimately, you cannot manage what you cannot measure, right? Either quantitatively or qualitatively.
That's true.
On there's yeah, yeah. So on the other side, international organizations can help a great deal providing technical expertise and resources to evaluate the impact of interventions, which can inform then policymakers to optimize their policies. It can also provide capacity strengthening in different levels to design and implement policies around certain priority topics. So one of the things I've learned is that we need to create strong and long-lasting partnerships to address complex and environmental challenges, not only between government and international organizations, but also with academia, with private sector, with local and indigenous communities. Happy to talk further on that, but yeah,
Uh,
I
uh,
know.
You're very right, and especially when we talk about administrative side, and since you have been in environmental organizations as well, and you have worked a lot on that, this is something that is something that we all researchers should be doing because in academic research is very different from the policy making and the policy side of research, and the difference comes from the impact evaluations and impact measurements and policies that we suggest. So that is a totally different side, and when I was looking at your CV, and I was looking at your work, I found out that impact measurement is a critical aspect of your work so far. So can you share a specific example where your analysis has made a tangible difference, particularly in the governmental sector?
Um, so I'm gonna talk about impact measurement. I think I've done impact measurement and evaluation from different sides. Um, right now, in my current work, basically, I need to evaluate the impact of every potential deal, and we help to the companies to set up KPIs to against which they can evaluate their own performance and make sure they are generating the intended impact. And the same thing happens and can be extrapolated to the public sector. Of course, you always need to constant, evaluate somehow, get feedback on the ground from the policies you implement. So basically, I was able to conduct a couple of evaluations of indigenous, like there was a program in Mexico, a conditional cash transfer program, for instance, Oportunidades Now Prospera, We're trying to evaluate the impact of hiring indigenous promoters to increase the participation of indigenous people in the program, indigenous underserved people in the program. This cash transfer program basically consists of offering monetary incentives to underserved people to get their children to school and to health services. So basically, the evaluation of this program, which was discontinued, allowed the new administration to relaunch the program and keep offering that, keep hiring indigenous promoters because I mean, the impact was amazing in the reducing the dropouts of indigenous participants in the program, but also it was improving a lot the revitalization of local languages because now indigenous people were attended in their own language, and because kids that were before part of the families that were participants in this program now graduated school and they were getting access to to a proper job. And so it was an amazing experience. But that's how a concrete example on how, impact measurement contribute to something concrete in the public sphere. Yeah.
Thank you, Dr. Camila. That seems very interesting, and particularly when you are doing such kind of projects, for some vulnerable population or a vulnerable society, the impacts that the cash transfer programs begin is a very interesting kind of a study. And I think and you have done a great deal while carrying out that project. I'll move to another question, and it's up to you if you want to answer or skip it because it is about your biggest challenge that you have faced so far in implementing policies, particularly in Peru government, and how did you overcome that?
I mean, I would say the biggest challenges were political instability and lack of continuity of policies. In 3 years, I was working in the Ministry of Environment. I had to convince different 8 ministers of environment to pass certain laws or regulations that were, beneficial for Peru in general, no? Particular sectors. So then, I mean, I think there are some difficulties in accessing budget to implement long-lasting policies. Some of the Ministry of Environment is one of the ministers with less government budget, so it's the second less smallest in terms of budget. So you need to get a lot of access to international cooperation financing. But those access comes with certain conditionalities. The projects sometimes comes with some activities, that international cooperation has in mind. And usually what I saw is that there is a lack of perspective from those organizations to achieve economic sustainability. So you get, 5, 7, 10 millions to implement some 4 or 5 year project with small gold mining miners in Peru, to reduce the amount of mercury used and pollute less. But then those type of projects are lacking, a value chain. They're not connecting, these miners to sustainable markets at the end. So it's more capacity strengthening, information providing. But when you don't align incentives of local players, and particularly economic incentives, it's very difficult to achieve sustainable impact in that sense, sustainable behavioral change. And finally, I would say, I mean, policy making is like an art. There's not a single route to generate change, so it's important to develop a wider range of networks that can support your ideas, from indigenous communities to technocrats to academia to international communities. So again, partnerships and collaborations across different actors are very relevant. Um, I would say kind of, I don't know if that answered the question.
I believe that once you are into you know at these top positions, um, you need to have a certain kind of skill set or a certain kind of positive mindset that leads you ahead in life. So my next question would be that, in your opinion, what are the key skills the kind of a mindset that young economists, because we have right now many of students with us, so what is the kind of a mindset that young economists need to have for making an impact in the today's world?
Um, I think uh, I think we need to be humble. We finish our careers with a lot of, great models in our head, wanting to implement all what we've learned. But we need to be humble to and develop capacity to listen and understand different cultures, different needs, different contexts. We need to develop capacity to see failures as an opportunity to learn, which is something also very difficult in the way we have been traditionally educated. But that's the base of science and knowledge building, right? Ultimately. So, and we need capacity to adapt policies and ideas based on those learnings. So, I mean, it's important to remember that economic models are a simplification of reality. And sometimes policies can be designed with some intended impact and like very good economic theory behind, but can generate some perverse incentives that are not intended. So it's important to monitor and evaluate the impact of those policies, not only through quantitative and expensive methods, but also through qualitative surveys and interviewing experts and beneficiaries on the ground. In that sense, it's important that economists collaborate in interdisciplinary research and are able to understand its value.
You're very right in it. There's one more, thing that we both have in common, and that is behavioral economics. So I did my PhD in behavioral economics, and when I saw your work as well, so I saw that you're also, a behavioral economist, and you have been working in this field. So my next question would be that, how do you think human behavior can influence the environmental policies, and how, in simple way, we can use behavioral insights, the nudges, to design better interventions?
Yeah, that's a great question. I mean, things related to sustainable consumption, energy efficiency, waste generation, recycling are concrete things where human behavior can have a direct impact in the environment. Um, Human behavior needs to be at the center of certain environmental policies. Some questions brings to my mind. It comes, for instance, like to what extent an increase in energy efficiency can generate an increase in consumption of energy, which is called the rebound effect. What's the impact of a tax on plastic bags? What the tax should be in order for people to change habits? Will information or nudges for adopting sustainable habits can have will have a long-lasting behavioral change or just a short-term one? How to increase recycling rates? Is the problem in the consumer and its lack of information and motivation to recycle? Is the problem in the lack of trust in waste management agencies? Or is it a problem of high transactional costs associated with recycling? How will citizens change behavior to adapt to climate change? All of these issues are related to behavioral issues that needs to be considered in shaping environmental policies and ask some of these questions. So those are some of the examples I have in mind.
So just, continuing your same discussion, can I ask you to share, some kind of I can say, can you share some kind of example where behavioral interventions can significantly improve the outcomes of an environmental or a social policy, particularly in which you have worked so far?
Sorry, I
Okay,
missed.
okay, let me come again. I was trying to ask you that can you share, some example where behavioral interventions, which we were already talking about, has significantly improved the outcomes of an environmental or a social programs in which you were involved?
Yes. I mean, I talked already about the Mexican evaluation that enabled to, relaunch a program that was successful but discontinued with a new administration. I have another example in the Ministry of Education. For instance, I partnered with professors from Yale and Pompeu Fabra to utilize administrative data from the Ministry of Education from students and teachers' evaluations to understand to what extent an unconditional salary increase in rural areas could help to attract better quality teachers and improve student outcomes in those areas. We used information about wage compensation variations across rural locations provided according to exogenous population based rules. And we ran a quasi experiment that enabled us to demonstrate that the intended impact was there, that those unconditional salary increase for deprived areas were generating a positive impact, reducing the inequality gap in the provision of public education. So basically, those compensations was actually driving the attraction of better quality teachers and generating better student outcomes. The problem is that it took like 4 years to gather all the required information and to run the experiment. But still, we consider this type of research can provide concrete evidence and reassurance to policymakers to keep prioritizing policies that has a positive and measurable impact. And ultimately, this type of results can be used as a tool in case of political opposition or in context of government changes, as we saw in the Mexican situation with the conditional cash transfer program.
Dr. Camila, since I'm a behavioral economist myself, and I see that usually, when we work on behavioral economics, the behavioral insights, for example, are very often, context specific. So, what advice would you give to researchers, young researchers particularly, who are trying to adapt such methods to, look into environmental economics, or, to look into, the resource constrained environments?
As I said, I think understanding the context using local knowledge is important. And again, like I think I already said that this, but it's important seeing failure as an opportunity to learn and adapt and calibrate policies until you achieve the desired impact in the population. So monitoring and evaluation for this is key.
Dr. Camila, many of our students are interested in pursuing their researches in development and environmental and behavioral economics. So I would like, because you are a part of those institutions which are, we can say, the big think tanks. So what are some of the emerging areas of research that you think the current students should be focusing upon? Some key areas for research.
I'm going to talk about my experience based on what I see in my work every day, in what I saw, I mean, from my own experience. So basically, I mean, some of the things that comes to my mind are, for instance, the opportunities and limits in the use of technology to drive human behavior. I think there's a proliferation of apps, for instance, to induce human behavior towards healthy and sustainable habits. There are even some startups using tech apps in topics like microfinance or to provide technical assistance. And they seem very good in theory, but in reality, how effective can they be to drive long and sustainable change, especially in deprived settings, for instance? Another issue is nature-based solutions. I think nature-based solutions will represent 1/3 of the solutions to combat this climate change, basically. So, but we see a lot of coordination failures between different actors to achieve timely and scalable like change. From one side, international organizations have patient and concessional capital, but they end up asking market-based returns from impact investors and pose onerous and sometimes unfeasible conditions to co-invest uh, with private sector in nature-based solutions. Governments are creating carbon credit policies that require, for instance, that a high percentage of the carbon credits generated through forest-related interventions are kept by governments. So this imposes harder challenges and risks for private capital to come and invest in those settings. And the price of the carbon is not yet high enough. So these type of things can severely reduce the expected revenues for these type of projects and retard the investments in these areas. Now our topic is climate adaptation. I think we see already tangible impacts of climate change, no? So, but how is human behavior adapting to these things? From one side, we observe, a lot of climate anxiety, personal investment decisions affected by expected consequences, or humans and cities, how will they adapt to this uncertain world? Like right now, we see some cities planting trees to avoid the urban heat island effect. In rural areas, we see that like starting of agroforestry being used, as a way for trees to generate natural shade for cash crops, for instance. So um, then I mean, like, what's going to happen with water scarcity, for instance? How will we live in a world where fresh water is increasingly scarce? So I think those are kind of the salient topics that comes to my mind from my experience.
Thank you, Dr. Camila. Just the last question. We know that you're short of time, and we are very thankful to you for your time for us. So, just a last question for you. If you could go back and give us one piece of advice to your younger self when starting your career, what would it be?
Um, I mean, it's very simple, and I think it would be believe in yourself. Despite your difficulties, you are unique, and therefore you have always something valuable to offer to the world and to your community. And you're unique because of your background, because your life experience, because a lot of factors that goes beyond the education you received. So yeah, that would be in a nutshell.
Thank you so much, Dr. Camila, for sharing your insights with us today. We will now take few questions from the audience. If anybody has questions, please share. But before that, let me introduce you. We have with us Professor Dr. Nawaz with us. He is heading Department of Economics at University of Lahore. Welcome, sir.
Welcome, everybody. And in particular, it is an absolute honor and privilege to welcome you. Your extensive contribution to the environmental economics have been instrumental in shaping and understanding uh, the challenges we are facing, the climate is facing right now. I have published many of the articles on international trade. My area has been international trade, but few articles I have written international trade in nexus with the environmental concerns. So the one question which comes in my mind, that is, what role should international trade policies play in mitigating environmental degradation, and how the trade agreements incorporate sustainable practices uh, without compromising and without bringing competitiveness low in the low income country.
How can you say trade, right? How
Yeah,
can you repeat the question? I missed
uh,
some
my
of
question
the.
is that how international trade policies can play a role in mitigating environmental degradation, and trade agreement how they can be incorporated in sustainable practices without bringing low competitiveness and without bringing a low competitiveness in low income countries.
I think that's a great question because me coming from a developing country and comparing our policies and regulations with EU and UK, I see a trade agreement between developed countries can only be, I think, and depending on the terms, can be beneficial in the level of requirements, for instance, sustainability requirements. You need to produce certain product to reach certain standards in to access those markets. So I think that can be taken as an opportunity to, export kind of the good practices in terms of regulation into developing markets. Another concrete example I will give is concretely in Peru. There was one minister that decided to close the office of forestry management in Peru, and then that was illegal in the as part of the trade agreement we had with the U.S. Actually, the U.S. Had as part of the conditions that we create that office that was key to protect forests in the area and to avoid illegal logging, for instance. So that that initial desire to close that agency could not happen because we had this trade agreement. So I think trade agreements can be used as an opportunity to, to raise the standards of what we need to, produce more sustainably in a sense. I don't know if that answers your question.
Dr. Camila, there is one more question, and it's a very generic question. Maybe you can answer it with some experiment that you have done. Shoaib Malik is asking us that how do you design experiments to study the economic behavior?
I won't go so much into the technical details, but basically, I was thinking about, like, for instance, you can have access to some, you need a treatment and a control group, right? And you need that basically the treatment and the control group are, I guess you already know this, but are similar. And you need to introduce some exogenous, variation between those groups. But it really depends. I mean, usually you can run very expensive experiments like experimental, which are like the golden rule, randomized controlled trials. But you can also do some quasi-experimental. So you can use administrative data and have like, for instance, explore, compare treatment and control groups based on this exogenous variation, and then evaluating the what we did, for instance, with the rural compensations in Peru. I mean, I won't go so much into the technical details, but I'm happy to, share the paper and, ask any questions later.
Thank
In
you,
a
Dr.
separate
Sriram.
call.
It is also a very generic question, and it's just hard to answer like this because, there's so many experiments and there's so many, ways to conduct, experiments.
Yeah, yeah,
It's hard to
I,
answer with
I,
one generic question. So,
yeah.
I think we
I
don't
would
have.
say it depends also on the opportunity. So on the opportunity of the government to give you access to the data, on the opportunity of taking advantage of, private infrastructure. For instance, we invest in smart thermostats. Those smart thermostats can, provide some nudges, informational nudges to people. So, I mean, it really depends on the opportunity you see and how can you run at the end these experiments cheap and fast, because I mean randomized controlled trials tend to be kind of very expensive in a sense. So yeah.
Thank you, Dr. Camila, for sharing your insights with us today. And on the behalf of everyone here, let me thank Professor Dr. Nawaz as well for joining us. And it has been really an engaging and a thought-provoking session. Sorry, we committed with you that we are going to take 30 minutes and we are 10 minutes ahead of it. But thank you so much for staying with us, for giving your time today, and your journey and your expertise have truly inspired us today. So we look forward, Dr. Camila, to stay connected with you and learning more from your future work. We would also want that someday in future, maybe we can invite you to Pakistan. Pakistan is a very beautiful country and we share 4 seasons here. So thank you to all participants again for joining us today. And thank you to Dr. Ghulam Ghouse. I don't know why he could not make up to the session, maybe due to some connectivity issue. But this session was being co-hosted by him. And thank you again to all the attendees for their questions and enthusiasm. This is Dr. Aribah signing off. Take care and have a very good day.
Bye. Thank you very much. A pleasure.